In 1984, 6-year-old Mark's birthday took a dark turn when his father, in a sudden bout of madness, forced him and his older brother to flee their home. His father believed malevolent forces from another dimension were after them. Mark's mother, recognizing her husband's insanity, tried to help, but in vain. The man led his sons to a cemetery, where his head inexplicably burst into flames, leaving Mark, now 16, with enduring scars from that nightmarish event, despite a decade having passed since his father's breakdown. The family is still haunted by those events, and Mark is yet to uncover the secrets to conquer his nightmares. He's now at a school where he struggles to fit in, as even the teachers taunt him due to his older brother's institutionalization after the cemetery incident. Despite the past shadows, Mark tries not to dwell on them today. He's smitten with his new classmate, Becky. Mark meets up with his older brother, Thomas, who's just completed treatment and opened a music store. As a birthday present, Thomas gives Mark a book called The Chronicle. Mark remembers it from their dad's collection, but isn't thrilled about the gift. Surprisingly, Thomas also believes in an alternate world called the Black Tower, and wants Mark to explore it with the book. Mark initially thinks it's crazy, but agrees to check it out when he gets home later. As Mark peruses the Chronicle, he learns that his forebears were fixated on the Black Tower. The book brims with horned beings, and even a legendary giant griffin. In a sudden fright, Mark unintentionally gets transported to the Black Tower's realm, where a horned beast starts pursuing him, eventually ensnaring him. Astonishingly, when all hope seems gone, Mark miraculously makes it back home. He's still struggling to fully comprehend the nightmarish ordeal. Mark flirts with Becky at school. Then he sees his therapist, Dr. Peters, and recalls a night in the cemetery a decade ago. A fire took his father's life, and Mark has battled anger issues since. He shares his strange chronicle visions with Dr. Peters, but the doctor sees nothing unusual. To overcome that crazy feeling, Mark decides to stop reading the Chronicle and goes on a date with Becky. They connect, and both love music. After a great date, Mark goes home to celebrate his birthday with his brother Thomas and their mother Petra. A dispute occurs during dinner when Petra discloses that she had sent Thomas to a psychiatric hospital because of his obsession with the Black Tower. She doesn't believe in parallel worlds and wants to safeguard her sons from their father's fate. This prompts Thomas to be resolute about proving the Black Tower's existence to Mark. The siblings visit the attic cemetery of an abandoned church, where they find their father's old carpenter's plummet. The descent becomes their weapon against the fearsome griffin beast in the Black Tower. Only by joining forces can the brothers defeat this threat. Mark isn't thrilled about facing this evil force, but he seems to have no choice. A cemetery statue comes to life and attacks them, but luckily, another statue intervenes and protects them, providing sanctuary in the church. The next morning, Mark wakes up in the church, but his brother is missing. Anxiously, he rushes to the music store and overhears the Chronicle's whispers, revealing that Thomas is inside the Black Tower. Mark hides the cursed book and seeks a rational explanation for the mysterious events. He consults Dr. Peters, who advises him not to avoid his problems. In a surprising turn, Mark finds out that Dr. Peters is Becky's father, who warns his daughter against getting involved with Mark. Mark, gaining courage, reopens the Chronicle to find a way to help his brother. Suddenly, he's transported to the Black Tower's realm. Meanwhile, Becky investigates why the townspeople see Mark as unusual. Her search reveals a grim event from a decade ago when Mark's father doused himself in gasoline in the cemetery church and set himself on fire in front of his sons. This revelation deeply disturbs Becky. In the Black Tower, Mark meets his brother Thomas, who wants to ascend to the tower's top, defeat the griffin, and live there forever. However, Mark wants to stay in the real world. He tells Thomas that he can move between realms. Thomas understands that Mark can travel between worlds, but keeps the details of this power secret. At dawn, the two brothers wake up in the woods and encounter horned slave hunters hunting for captives. They capture Thomas, but Mark escapes. Sadly, Mark can't rescue his brother, so he transports himself back to the real world inside a music store. Inside the store, Mark unexpectedly encounters Becky, who had come searching for him. In an accidental encounter, Mark injures Becky. Both Becky and the store attendant Memo insist on an explanation from Mark. Meanwhile, in the shadowy Black Tower, horned creatures eagerly await the awakening of a powerful being they call the Griffin. They revere him as their father and idolize him as a deity. The Griffin's grand ambition is to dominate all living beings, and control many realms, including Earth. Despite Mark's account of these events, Memo and Becky remain skeptical. To validate the existence of the Black Tower, Mark decides to lead them to the cemetery. However, upon reaching the secret room in the attic, it mysteriously disappears. Following this extraordinary adventure, Mark's friends begin to doubt his sanity. Frustrated by their disbelief, Mark's anger erupts, leading him to punch a stone. As a result of his emotional outburst, a stone wall in the Black Tower begins to crack, revealing the imprisoned griffin. The horned creatures rejoice in anticipation of their god's arrival. Later that evening, Mark regains his composure and decides to find his brother. Knowing he can't do it alone, he asks for Memo's help. Together, they sneak into the basement of an abandoned church and find a portal using clues from the Chronicle. This portal takes them to the Black Tower's realm, with Memo starting to believe Mark's claims. However, the portal unexpectedly closes, leaving the boys unable to return. Mark attempts to teach Memo how to use the Chronicle to return, but instead, Mark finds himself back home. His mother, upon seeing the Chronicle, locks him in his room, fearing he'll follow in his father's footsteps. In his frustration, Mark shouts, causing the wall in the Black Tower to shatter even further, setting the griffin free. The next morning, Mark is released by his mother and hurries to the portal to rescue Memo. Memo isn't in the same place anymore. Mark gets protective gear, leaves the Chronicle with Becky, apologizes for his past actions, and shares a passionate kiss with her. Becky still has doubts about the Black Tower, but promises to be at the church at the agreed time to open the portal and return Mark and Memo to the real world. In the world of the Black Tower, Mark increases the volume of the music to attract Memo. For now, only the horned monsters hear the sounds and begin to hunt Mark. Mark escapes from the horned creatures and encounters a more human-looking individual. This stranger protects Mark, causing the pursuers to leave empty-handed. Mark's savior turns out to be Memo, who looks quite different with a thick beard. In this world, a single Earth day is equivalent to 3 weeks, giving Memo ample time to adjust. Memo has discovered that regular people live in the Black Tower world, where the horned creatures hunt and enslave them. These monsters torment their enslaved victims, including Thomas. However, the boys lack a concrete plan and weapons to rescue him at the moment. Suddenly, Mark and Memo spot the horned creatures and start to run. Their escape is blocked by a vast chasm. Relying on instinct, Mark grabs Memo and jumps into the abyss. During their descent, the boys teleport and land safely in Mark's bedroom in the real world. Meanwhile, Becky attempts to ascertain the truth about the existence of the Black Tower, or if Mark's claims are merely the product of his imagination. In her quest, she uses a method from the Chronicle to revive a withered flower. The book suggests watering the flower will summon a creature, but Becky's initial attempts fail. Her next effort involves opening the church portal, but it also proves unsuccessful. Becky becomes convinced that Mark is going insane. Unbeknownst to Becky, in her absence, the flower miraculously comes to life. This happens because the griffin can't communicate in an understandable language. In the world of the Black Tower, the horned creatures choose a human slave to be the voice for the griffin. The griffin uses its claws to enter the human's mind, making the unfortunate individual transmit the griffin's thoughts and actions. At first, the griffin talks to the horned creature who let Mark escape, stressing Mark's importance. However, Mark and Memo are unaware of this as they plan to save Thomas and return to the Black Tower. Before setting out, Mark meets Becky and asks for the Chronicle back. Regrettably, she thinks Mark is delusional and has already handed the book to her father. Becky also believes it's best for her and Mark to go their separate ways, leading to another outburst of Mark's anger. At the same time, a mysterious, poker-faced man approaches Dr. Peters, looking for a mosquito. It becomes clear that Dr. Peters has his own secrets. After this encounter, the doctor talks to Petra, Mark's mother, and claims her son is mentally unstable. Despite her heavy heart, Petra decides to have her son admitted to a psychiatric facility, following Thomas's wishes. Mark, however, resists and evades the orderlies, heading to the church. As the orderlies prepare to give Mark a sedative, a mysterious figure in a brightly colored hood intervenes, fiercely attacking them. The boys seize the chance to escape through the portal. An unidentified figure steps out of the church, pulling down the hood to reveal Mark's face to Petra. She's taken aback, suspecting her son's involvement in the recent attack on the orderlies. In the Black Tower, the real Mark finds himself trapped, unable to return to the normal world, determined to complete his mission of rescuing Thomas. Becky, however, hears about the incident and withdraws to her room, overwhelmed with sadness and disappointment. She lies on the floor, immersing herself in music when a large spider suddenly crawls into her mouth. This creepy crawler is the same creature that emerged from the dried flower in the Chronicle when it encountered water. With bravery, Becky removes the critter with tweezers and neutralizes it with salt. Later, she discovers the Chronicle in her father's desk, reigniting her belief in the Black Tower's existence. Meanwhile, Dr. Peters, Becky's father, discreetly burns the clothes he wore when impersonating Mark during the attack on the orderlies. It's clear he can change his appearance and has hostile intentions towards Mark. An otherworldly being with an alien-like face arrives at the Black Tower. The horned creatures welcome it as one of their kind. The newcomer sends mosquito scouts to inform the Griffin, raising doubts about Mark's return to his world, unbeknownst to Mark and Memo. They're in a hidden cabin near a scenic lake, planning to await the horned creature's arrival, track them down, and rescue Thomas. Becky takes it upon herself to approach Petra, conveying Mark's innocence and the possibility that someone framed him. She recounts the tale to a police officer who shows up at the scene. Becky discovers a troubling fact that all of Mark and Thomas's ancestors vanished within the same church. The portal is indeed real, but to activate it, they must retrieve the Chronicle, which Becky's pals inadvertently took to a local gathering in the Black Tower world. A mosquito scout lands on Memo and Mark, overhearing their plans before flying to share the information with the Manette. The Manette decrypts the mosquito's findings and relays everything to the Griffin. In the real world, the poker-faced man visits Dr. Peters again, being part of the Griffin's mosquito-serving group. Peters sees the Griffin as his master and takes pride in his role in ruining Mark's life. Now Peters is determined to ensure that his curious daughter, Becky, doesn't interfere with their plans. However, Becky isn't at home, so Peters searches through the dust in her room, gaining insight into her thoughts and plans. He resolves to find Becky at the party, briefly revealing his true form as a Manette due to his anger. He's also a member of the same race. Becky, Petra, and the police officer come to the party. Becky discovers that the Chronicle got wet, likely birthing a creature from the second flower. It injures a girl severely. Becky tries to find and stop the creature, but Peters arrives and hypnotizes his daughter. The creature grows and goes on a rampage, attacking everyone, including the police officer. Petra manages to disable the menacing creature with a pistol, and it unexpectedly turns into a bear. In the dark Black Tower, Mark realizes he can teleport when intense emotions overpower him, not only fear, but also love. His training is interrupted by vivid visions, all featuring his father, who still blames Mark for a tragedy a decade ago. Someone is intent on driving Mark to the edge of insanity, fueling his hatred for those around him. His anger is now focused on Memo, who also holds Mark responsible for their father's death on that fateful night. Their father had wanted to burn his research on the Griffin in the church, ensuring the enigmatic Black Tower remained hidden. Mark was supposed to stay calm in the car that night, but he had a meltdown, diverting his brother who was helping their father. When the police came, their father had to eliminate all the evidence, including himself. Fueled by Memo's accusations, Mark loses it and erupts, causing a disastrous incident. The Griffin wall shatters, exposing a shocking truth. Mark realizes he attacked a Manette posing as Memo, not the real Memo. Mark and his friends confront the imposter, who admits to having a dark power to read minds and shapeshift to control people. He sent the Griffin to Mark, who must embrace hatred to unlock its full potential. As the Griffin nears invincibility, Mark and friends escape to the real world, encountering a police officer who reveals he witnessed Petra's husband's tragic death in the church graveyard a decade ago. The cop states the man didn't incinerate. He just vanished like a magic trick. The case closed with an unusual twist. The prosecutor was the Manette himself. This affirms the presence of magic in the Dark Tower world. Our friends head out to confront the horned creatures and find Thomas working in a mine. As night falls, the creatures become less active. Memo distracts them, allowing Mark to approach his trapped brother. But when Mark steps through, a gate slams behind him. Initially, he's not concerned because he can teleport with his brother from anywhere. However, the mine's sticky mud hinders Mark's magic. The Griffin set this trap to capture Mark, steal his teleportation powers, and infiltrate Earth for its dark scheme. Mark, however, perseveres. With a carpenter's plumb bob, he breaks the stone barrier and saves his brother. While the mud temporarily weakens Mark's powers, preventing him from teleporting for a few hours, the group regathers and transports an injured Memo towards the portal in a carriage. The Griffin is displeased when it learns what happened and takes off after Mark. A heated showdown occurs near the portal between Thomas and Mark. Mark refuses to fight or hurt anyone, but Thomas taunts him as a coward, sparking a fierce brawl between the brothers for the plumb bob. During their struggle, Thomas lands a decisive blow on Mark, just as the Griffin swoops down. At Becky's, a hypnotic session occurs, and her dad orders her to stay in her room. However, with clever maneuvers, the cop and Petra sneak in. They whisk Becky away and head to the church to activate the portal together. Meanwhile, the Griffin seizes control of Thomas, attempting to manipulate Mark into embracing hatred and sparking a battle. However, Mark's thoughts turn to his father, Becky, and the joyful moments in life. He realizes that hatred cannot be conquered with more hatred. Mark knows he must enrage the Griffin himself. It's their only chance to defeat it. Mark drops the carpenter's plumb bob, heads for the portal, and Petra activates it. Becky enters the Dark Tower's realm. Mark seizes the chance, swiftly attacking the Griffin, freeing his brother and friends. Becky, Mark, and Memo quickly take the injured Thomas back to reality. Petra promptly seals the portal, leaving the angry Griffin on the other side. The Griffin withdraws to plan a new strategy, sending agents to disrupt Mark's loved ones in the real world, pressuring him to return to the Dark Tower and harness his extraordinary power. The wounded group gets medical care, and their mother visits, apologizing for her lack of trust and pledging support for her son. In the evening, Mark visits Becky, and their feelings lead to a tender kiss.